Jenna stood by the window, staring out into the chilly night, her breath fogging up the glass. The small, dimly lit room she called home felt too quiet, too empty. She had spent most of the day in a haze, trying to distract herself from the unease that had crept up on her over the last few weeks. She was 18, still trying to find her place in the world, and tonight was supposed to be a fun night out with friends. It was supposed to be simple. Roller skating at the local Harrow Leisure Center with a group of people she thought she could trust. Jenna had spent weeks trying to piece together a sense of belonging in a world that often felt out of reach. Her mind replayed the message she had received that morning. "Hey, Jenna, come join us tonight at the roller disco. It'll be fun." The familiar names of her friends scrolled across the screen. Bradley, Cameron, Shiloh. People she had hung out with before, people who had seemed like they understood her. But now, as Jenna read the message over and over, doubt began to creep in. Her heart rate quickened, and she pressed her palm to her chest, as if trying to steady the pounding of her pulse. The weight of the world suddenly seemed much heavier. The phone buzzed again, a follow-up message from Bradley. "We're all going to be there. Can't wait to see you." She smiled weakly, though the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Jenna had always been the odd one out in the group, the one who felt like she had to prove herself, to constantly remind everyone that she was just like them. But there was a secret she had kept hidden for a long time. A secret that, no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, never seemed to go away. She was transgender. The people who had once been her closest friends had no idea about her past, the years of struggle, and the personal battles she had fought in silence. It had been easier to let them think of her as someone they could relate to, someone they could accept. They didn't need to know the truth, did they? But as she slid her phone into her pocket and stood up to get ready, a strange feeling settled in her stomach. Something was off. Maybe it was the fear of being exposed. Or maybe it was something deeper, something more sinister that she couldn't quite put her finger on. Jenna arrived at the leisure center just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pavement. The parking lot was almost empty, save for a few cars and the occasional passerby. She noticed a group of people standing near the entrance, their faces obscured by black masks. She could barely make out the outlines of their figures as they leaned against a bus stop sign, laughing amongst themselves. The moment her shoes hit the pavement, a chill ran through her. She hesitated, her steps faltering. But then Bradley's voice echoed across the lot, warm and inviting. "Jenna, over here," he called, waving his hand to get her attention. Reluctantly, she walked toward the group. There was no turning back now. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she kept her head high, her eyes on the ground. She had nothing to hide, she told herself. She was just like everyone else, or at least she wanted to be. As she reached them, Bradley gave her a playful shove. "You ready to skate?" he asked. His words seemed too cheerful, too rehearsed. Something felt wrong, but Jenna couldn't quite put it together. Without warning, the group moved quickly, surrounding her. They led her away from the entrance, down a narrow path that wound around the back of the building, away from prying eyes. Jenna's stomach twisted with unease as they drew closer to a darkened car park, far from the safety of the lights. "What's going on?" Jenna asked, her voice trembling. But before she could process what was happening, she felt a sharp push from behind. She stumbled, her knees hitting the pavement. In an instant, everything changed. It happened too fast for Jenna to fully comprehend. One of the masked figures lunged at her with a knife, its blade gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights of the car park. She barely had time to react as she felt the cold steel slice through her skin, the pain searing her body. "Please, stop," she screamed, her voice breaking. But no one stopped. Instead, they just kept coming. It was like they had planned this, like they had been waiting for this moment for weeks. The figure who had struck first, Summer Betts Ramsey, delivered blow after blow, each stab more forceful than the last. Jenna gasped for air, her chest tight as the life drained from her with each passing second. The sharp pain coursing through her body made it hard to think, hard to focus on anything except the intense feeling of betrayal. Her mind flashed to all those moments of trust, those moments where she had been vulnerable, where she had allowed herself to believe she was safe. All of it shattered in an instant, replaced by the suffocating feeling of fear. The world around her seemed to blur as her vision began to fade. As the stabbing continued, the others in the group joined in, kicking and punching her, laughing as they did so. It felt surreal, like a nightmare from which she could not wake. But amidst the chaos, Jenna's body instinctively tried to protect itself. She rolled to the side, gasping for breath, her hands reaching out for something, anything, that could help her escape. The cold pavement pressed against her skin, but it was no match for the icy grip of terror that held her in place. Jenna's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, none of them making sense. Why was this happening? Why had they done this? But her body was acting on pure instinct now, her will to survive taking over. She managed to crawl toward the nearest car, dragging herself along the rough ground. As she reached out for the car door handle, she felt a hand grab her shoulder, spinning her around. Her heart leapt in her chest, and she screamed in sheer panic. But before anything else could happen, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted the madness. Several people appeared out of the shadows, rushing toward the scene. Their faces were filled with shock and concern as they saw Jenna lying there, bloodied and broken. "Call an ambulance," one of them shouted, pulling out their phone. Another person bent down beside Jenna, trying to offer comfort, but she could barely register their presence. The world was spinning, the pain too much to bear. Her head lolled to the side as the voice of a stranger reached her. "Stay with me. Help's on the way." By the time the paramedics arrived, Jenna was barely conscious. She could hear the distant sound of sirens, the rush of voices all around her, but it all felt so far away. She was losing grip on reality, her body shutting down from the blood loss. The pain was unbearable, yet somehow, it was the emotional wounds that cut deepest. As she was rushed to the hospital, Jenna thought about her life, the people who had betrayed her, and the scars she would carry for the rest of her life. She had trusted them, and in the end, they had taken everything from her. Her physical wounds would heal, but the emotional scars, the trauma, would stay with her forever. The hospital was a blur of activity. Nurses and doctors surrounded her, working to stabilize her as best they could. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw their faces, Summer, Bradley, Cameron, Shiloh, and heard their mocking laughter. And then she thought of the message that had been sent after the attack. "IT deserved it." Those words echoed in her mind, a reminder of the cruelty that had been inflicted upon her. Jenna's eyes fluttered open in the hospital bed, her body still weak and aching. The steady beep of machines and the sterile smell of the room were a far cry from the chaos she had endured just hours before. She felt disconnected from her own body, as if everything was happening to someone else. The thick bandages wrapped around her torso were a stark reminder of the 14 stabbing wounds she had sustained. But it wasn't just the physical pain that hurt. It was the betrayal, the anger, the confusion. Her mind replayed the events in a fragmented blur, like a broken film reel. Summer's face, contorted with rage, the cruel laughter of the others, the sharp bite of the knife sinking into her flesh. Those moments were seared into her memory, too vivid to erase, too raw to ignore. Her mother, who had rushed to the hospital as soon as she had heard the news, sat by her bedside, her face pale and tear-streaked. Jenna reached out a trembling hand, grasping her mother's. It was the only thing that felt real in that moment, the warmth of her mother's touch, the soothing presence she had always provided. "Jenna," her mother whispered, her voice shaky with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry this happened to you." Jenna's lips parted, but she had no words. What could she say? How could she explain the depths of her pain? Her mind was clouded with a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. but she could see in her mother's eyes that she understood. The love was there, the concern, the anguish. It was all there. The nurses came in to check on her. They were kind, but their presence felt distant, almost like a blur. Jenna's thoughts drifted again, this time to the scars she would carry for the rest of her life. Not just the ones on her skin, but the ones inside her heart. The trust she had lost, the innocence shattered, the safety that had been taken from her. She had always feared this moment, the moment when someone would find out who she truly was and reject her. But she had never imagined it would come like this. Betrayed by those she thought were her friends. Attacked because of something she had no control over. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, police interrogations, and endless paperwork. Jenna was too exhausted to fight back the flood of emotions. But she had no choice. The investigation was moving forward, and the police had questions that needed answers. Detective Harris, a tall man with a stern expression, sat across from Jenna in the sterile interview room, his pen tapping rhythmically against the notepad in his hand. "Jenna, I know this is difficult, but we need you to tell us everything you can about what happened that night," he said gently. Jenna nodded slowly, trying to summon the strength to speak. Her voice was weak, hoarse from the trauma, but she still managed to say, They attacked me. They stabbed me. All of them. They knew about me. They knew I was transgender." Detective Harris didn't interrupt, allowing her to speak at her own pace. She continued, her words shaking but clear. "Bradley, Cameron, Shiloh, Summer, they were all there. They lured me to the car park, thinking I'd come for a fun night of skating. But it wasn't like that at all. They were waiting for me. And then they attacked." Jenna paused, her throat tightening as she recalled the vicious assault. Summer, she was the one with the knife. She stabbed me. And the others, they kicked me, punched me. It was like they wanted me to die. Tears welled up in Jenna's eyes as she relived the nightmare. Detective Harris leaned forward, his expression softening. "We've already arrested them. They're in custody now. We'll make sure they're held accountable for what they did." Jenna nodded numbly, though the weight of the situation hadn't fully sunken yet. The pain was still too fresh, the trauma too raw. She just wanted it all to end. She wanted to forget. Months later, the courtroom was packed with people. Friends, family, the media, all gathered to watch the trial unfold. The defendants, Summer Betts Ramsey, Bradley Harris, Cameron Osei, Shiloh Hines, and the unnamed 17-year-old boy, sat in the dock, their faces a mixture of indifference and defiance. Jenna sat in the front row, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the accused. Summer, the one who had wielded the knife, had her head bowed, but Jenna could feel her eyes burning into her from across the room. The others sat motionless, their expressions unreadable. The prosecutor, Deanna Here KC, stood up to present the case. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what happened to Jenna that night was not just a physical attack. It was an attack on her identity, an act of hatred against someone for simply being who they are. The defendants lured her to that car park with the intent to harm her. They stabbed her 14 times. They mocked her, degraded her, and showed no remorse for their actions." Jenna's breath caught in her throat as the prosecutor's words sank in. This wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a calculated, brutal assault on her existence. Her heart ached with a familiar mixture of anger and sorrow. She had never imagined that people could harbor so much hatred, especially from those she had once called friends. Throughout the trial, Jenna's victim impact statement was read aloud. She spoke of the physical scars, but more painfully, she spoke of the emotional ones, the inability to trust people, the constant fear that gripped her every time she left her home. She described the panic attacks that had become a regular part of her life, the insomnia that kept her awake at night, the crippling sense of shame that she couldn't shake off. But there was one part of her statement that hit hardest. "I never thought someone could have so much hatred toward me. I'm scared to trust anyone again. My future, my modeling career, everything I've worked for. It feels like it's slipping away because of the scars they left on me." The courtroom was tense, as the verdicts were delivered. Summer Betts Ramsey, Bradley Harris, Cameron Osei, Shiloh Hines, and the 17-year-old boy were all found guilty of causing grievous bodily harm with intent. Summer was also convicted of possessing a knife. The sentences were read aloud one by one. Summer Betts Ramsey, you are sentenced to 12 years in prison for your role in this brutal attack, the judge declared, his voice steady and firm. Bradley Harris, Cameron Osei, and Shiloh Hines each received sentences of 10 years for their involvement, while the 17-year-old boy was given a lesser sentence, though still substantial, for his part in the crime. Jenna sat still as the verdicts were read, her face a mask of emotion. She had never wanted revenge. She only wanted justice. And now, as she heard the sentences, she could finally begin to breathe a little easier, knowing that those who had hurt her would face the consequences of their actions. But even as the gavel fell, marking the end of the trial, Jenna knew that her journey was far from over. She would carry the weight of that night with her for the rest of her life. The scars, both physical and emotional, would never truly heal. But she had survived. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications. Stay connected, because together we'll keep moving forward, healing, and growing stronger every day.